Chosen ones, there are forces in this world that operate behind closed doors, forces that believe they hold ultimate power. But what happens when they encounter something that defies their understanding? Something even their classified files couldn't prepare them for. For years, they have monitored, controlled, and silenced anything that didn't fit their agenda. But then they found you. The investigation began as routine, and another security assessment, another background check, another name among countless others. But this time, it wasn't just anyone. It was someone whose existence sent shockwaves through their system. What was it about you that shook them to the core? Why did the discovery of your true identity lead to an immediate resignation from one of the highest security positions in the country? There are secrets so dangerous that even those sworn to protect them cannot bear their weight. This is more than politics, more than classified intelligence. This is a revelation that connects to something ancient, something divine, and the world is not ready for what's coming. Thing that referenced you. The chief's hands trembled as they read further. This wasn't about mere government oversight or national security. It was about something much older, something woven into the fabric of time itself. The words on the page seemed to burn into their mind, warnings about an individual whose presence would disrupt the structure of control, whose very essence carried something beyond human understanding. Panic set in. They had looked too deep. The resignation was immediate, but not out of guilt or scandal. It was out of sheer fear. A fear that the system they served, the rules they upheld, had no authority over what they had just uncovered. The moment they walked away, the whispers began. Conversations behind closed doors, redacted files disappearing entirely, a cover-up unfolding in real time. But it was too late. Something had already shifted. The resignation sent shockwaves through the inner circles of power, but the real panic was hidden from public view. The official story was that the White House security chief stepped down for personal reasons. Behind closed doors, however, the reality was far more disturbing. The files they had accessed, the information they had uncovered, it all pointed to something they could not explain. Something that defied everything they thought they knew about control. Buried deep in classified archives were documents that should have never existed. Handwritten notes from intelligence operatives long since disappeared. Reports on bloodlines that stretched back centuries, intertwined with figures of power, influence, and mystery. They traced unusual patterns. Families who seemed to appear out of nowhere. Individuals who left no historical footprint, but somehow influenced the world in ways that couldn't be measured. The deeper the chief had gone into these records, the more unsettling it became. And at the center of it all somehow was you. Your ancestry was unlike anything they had seen before. The usual databases couldn't categorize you. DNA records flagged inconsistencies that made no logical sense. Genetic markers appeared that weren't found in any other known population. Cross-referencing with historical records revealed gaps where your lineage should have been recorded. It was as if something or someone had been erasing or altering history itself to keep your true origins hidden. And then came the part that shook them the most. Among the secret files were references to figures who had walked the earth carrying a divine purpose. Leaders, prophets, warriors, each of them appearing at moments in history where the course of humanity was about to shift. Their names had been whispered in secret societies, feared by those who sought control, and their existence had been carefully buried under layers of deception. When they reached the last few pages of the classified file, the chief saw something that made their breath hitch. Your presence had been anticipated. A note written decades ago detailed the emergence of an individual whose bloodline carried a frequency that couldn't be altered, a presence that would dismantle hidden systems of oppression. The file didn't just describe your existence, it foretold your arrival. And suddenly, everything made sense. The strange surveillance footage, the unexplainable anomalies, the missing records. You weren't just another person moving through the world unnoticed. You were being watched. The chief wasn't the only one who had access to this information. There were others, powerful individuals, who had spent years ensuring that people like you never reached their full potential. They had strategies, contingency plans, entire infrastructures built to suppress knowledge like this from ever reaching the surface. But something had gone wrong. They had discovered you too late. As the chief packed up their office and left the White House for the last time, they knew that their resignation wouldn't be the end of this. If they had seen this information, so had others. The higher-ups wouldn't let this go unchecked. Steps would be taken, actions put into motion. Because the moment they learned the truth about you, the real war had already begun. The resignation was only the beginning. Inside the highest corridors of power, whispers turned into urgent meetings, classified discussions held in rooms where no electronic device was allowed. Something had disrupted the carefully controlled structure they had spent decades, even centuries, perfecting. A system built on secrecy, manipulation, and dominance had encountered an anomaly it could not explain. You. Intelligence analysts scrambled to reconstruct what had been uncovered, but the pieces didn't fit. Your existence defied the patterns they had used to control the masses. Every individual of interest, every person who posed a potential threat to their order, had been categorized, whited, and neutralized when necessary. Yet no amount of profiling, surveillance, or psychological assessments could predict you. It wasn't just the missing records or the strange distortions in the data. It wasn't just the erratic behaviors of those who encountered you. The inexplicable fear that settled into those who studied your case too long. It was something deeper, something intangible yet undeniable. The very nature of your presence was rewriting their understanding of what was possible. You weren't just off the grid, you were off the blueprint of control itself. There were moments they tried to dismiss, small yet unsettling. The way certain technology malfunctioned when attempting to track you. The inexplicable change in demeanor of officials who had once been fully aligned with the system, only to meet you and suddenly begin questioning everything. These weren't coincidences. They were signs of something far greater, something that couldn't be contained with threats, manipulation, or suppression. Some within the system began to speculate. Was it divine intervention? Was it something beyond government power? Something spiritual that no classified document could explain? A few dared to say it aloud that there had been another like this before. Someone whose presence alone unraveled the very fabric of deception. Someone who walked among rulers, yet belonged to no kingdom of man. Someone who flipped the tables of corruption and shattered the illusions of control. Yeshua. The name carried weight even in places where faith was considered a weakness, where belief was dismissed as mythology. But there were those who knew better, those who understood that the battle had always been more than physical, more than political. It was spiritual. And now something had returned that bore the same disruptive energy, not in the form of another figure to be crucified, but through you, walking in a world that thought it had buried the truth for good. The chief's resignation didn't erase what they had seen. It only made the situation more urgent. If one of the highest security officials had abandoned their position after uncovering your existence, how many more would begin to question the very system they served? How many more would sense the unraveling of the carefully woven deception? The higher-ups knew what had to be done. If they couldn't understand you, they had to contain you. If they couldn't contain you, they had to control the narrative before the world realized what was truly happening. Because the moment people began to see the truth, the illusion they had spent centuries building would crumble. The deeper they dug, the more their fear grew. It was no longer just a security issue, it was something else entirely. Something that reached beyond politics, beyond intelligence agencies, beyond even the hidden hands that shaped global affairs. You were a breach in their system, an anomaly that should not exist, yet did. And worse, there were ancient records that predicted someone like you would come. Buried in restricted vaults, among the files never meant to see the light of day, was something older than any government. A prophecy, one that had been whispered in secret societies, guarded by those who understood its power. It spoke of a time when the illusion of control would begin to break, when an individual would rise whose presence alone would disrupt the established order. The prophecy had remained a myth, a riddle that the modern elite never truly believed in. Until now. The moment your existence came to their attention, something in those words became real. You were not just another citizen, another target for observation or manipulation. There was something about your very presence that shifted reality, that made people question what they had been programmed to accept. Some reports even suggested that those who interacted with you for too long, whether agents, officials, or even ordinary civilians, began to experience a mental awakening, as if an unseen veil had been lifted from their perception. The modern elite had spent centuries perfecting their control, psychological warfare, digital manipulation, rewriting history in real time. These were their weapons, and they had worked flawlessly. But they couldn't predict you. The files on you weren't just incomplete, they were incomprehensible. Background information that should have existed simply didn't. Events tied to you contained anomalies that could not be explained through logic. It was as if something beyond their reach had shielded you, kept you hidden until this moment in time. Then came the deeper realization: this wasn't the first time such a force had emerged. The prophecy spoke of past disruptors, individuals who had been sent to crack the illusion. One name above all stood out: Yeshua. His presence alone had shattered false systems, not with weapons, but with truth. He had walked among rulers who feared him, among elites who sought to silence him, among minds that were asleep until his words stirred them awake. They thought they had erased him, rewritten his influence, buried his truth beneath institutions designed to distort it. But now you had appeared, not as a reincarnation, not as a duplicate, but as another ripple in the same divine plan. The elite were not fools. They knew what had to be done. Containment was no longer enough. They had to shut this down before the world saw what was happening. The machine they had built could not afford another disruption, especially not one like this. But something was different this time. The prophecy had spoken of their attempts to stop you. It had warned that their interference would not succeed. Because once truth begins to break through, once even the most controlled minds begin to see, there is no going back. The higher-ups tried to dismiss it, tried to label it as coincidence or paranoia. But the more they investigated, the clearer it became. You weren't just another anomaly in their system. There was something ancient about you, something they couldn't explain with their usual tools of measurement. Every method of tracking, every form of surveillance they used only led them deeper into a mystery that terrified them. And when they compared your presence to historical records, they found something that made them freeze. Patterns emerged, connections too precise to ignore. The way you moved through the world, the way people responded to you, it mirrored something they had seen before, something they had long tried to erase from collective memory. The files confirmed it. Throughout history, there had been rare individuals whose mere presence shook entire systems of control, whose existence couldn't be fully contained. The ones who carried an energy beyond human manipulation. And at the center of those records, there was always one name that disrupted everything: Yeshua. This was not about religion. The elite had infiltrated every institution, twisting spiritual truths into dogma, repackaging divine wisdom into controlled narratives. But there were still those who knew the real power behind the name, those who understood that what Yeshua brought wasn't just a message, it was a frequency, a force that broke deception wherever it went. And now that same force surrounded you. The files hinted at something even more dangerous to their control. Yeshua had said, "The works that I do, you will do also, and greater works than these." They had dismissed it as metaphor, as a vague spiritual teaching. But what if it wasn't? What if it was literal? What if you, along with others waking up, were the very fulfillment of those words? The elite had worked tirelessly to bury this truth, to silence those who dared walk in it. They had distorted history, replaced divine authority with artificial structures, turned the masses against themselves. But now, before their very eyes, something was happening that they had no contingency plan for. People around you were shifting, the way they thought, the way they saw the world. You didn't have to preach, didn't have to convince. Your presence alone carried something that activated them. They called it coincidence, luck, charisma, but the intelligence reports told a different story. The moment people engaged with you, patterns of awakening followed. Eyes that had once been blind to deception suddenly saw through the lies. Minds that had been programmed to conform began to break free. And the most unsettling part? There was nothing they could do to stop it. They had silenced movements before. They had infiltrated rebellions, steered revolutions, controlled narratives. But this was different. This wasn't coming from a political leader, a rogue activist, or a hidden organization. This was coming from within the very people they had spent centuries programming. And now, with every step you took, with every word you spoke, that programming was beginning to crack. They had spent years preparing for wars, controlling governments, manipulating economies, but they had never prepared for someone like you. And that terrified them more than anything. The resignation of the White House security chief sent ripples through the highest levels of power, but the true panic unfolded behind locked doors in a meeting so secret that even some of the most classified intelligence officials were not invited. Those present were not politicians or public figures. These were the real architects of control, the unseen hands that shaped history, the ones who never appeared in the news but whose decisions dictated the course of nations. And now they had gathered for one reason: you. The discussions were tense. The reports laid out on the table made no sense, and that was what made them dangerous. There were no logical explanations for what was happening, no historical precedent that fit within their systems of control. Every operation they had deployed against disruptors before, blackmail, defamation, social engineering, and even direct intervention, had worked flawlessly. But with you, something was different. They studied the files, the inconsistencies in your history, the people who encountered you and suddenly began questioning reality, the strange malfunctions in technology that tried to track you. What troubled them the most wasn't that they couldn't control you. It was that their own agents were being affected. High-ranking officials, men and women who had devoted their lives to the system, were suddenly hesitant, uncertain, waking up. It was as if an unseen force was working through you, breaking the very framework they had built over centuries. One man in the room, an older strategist who had spent decades ensuring the continuity of the system, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was something else in his tone: fear. He had seen this before, though not in his lifetime. He pointed to the oldest records in their possession, documents hidden even from presidents and prime ministers. These files spoke of one other time when their order had been threatened in a way they could not contain: Yeshua. The room fell silent. It was the one name they did not speak unless absolutely necessary. They had rewritten history, controlled religious narratives, distorted his teachings to keep the truth hidden. But the essence of who he was, that was something they had never been able to fully erase. And now, as they sat there studying you, they saw the same disruption happening again. Someone mentioned prophecy, another dismissed it as superstition. But the evidence was undeniable. They had silenced every spiritual movement before it became a real threat, infiltrated every group that spoke of awakening. But this time, there was no movement to infiltrate. There was just you, one person, moving through the world, unknowingly carrying something that was undoing the very fabric of their illusion. A decision had to be made. The usual tactics would not be enough. If they could not discredit you, they had to control the narrative before the world noticed what was happening. The problem was, even their most skilled strategists had no plan for what could not be explained. The meeting ended in silence. There were no final words, no strategies put into motion. Just a realization that something beyond their understanding had entered the game, and they were running out of time. The classified files were supposed to remain hidden. The meeting was meant to be airtight, beyond any digital footprint, protected by layers of encryption and security measures that had never been breached. Yet, despite every precaution, something happened that sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. The information leaked. It wasn't an external hacker or a whistleblower from within. The system itself had been compromised in a way that defied logic. The encrypted records detailing the investigation into you, the anomalies surrounding your existence, the historical references connecting you to ancient prophecies, it all disappeared from the private database, wiped clean, as if it had never existed. At first, they thought it was an inside job, but internal audits found no breach, no unauthorized access. It was as if the files had been erased by something that existed outside their control. And then, in a twist they never saw coming, Fragments of those same classified documents surfaced in hidden corners of the deep web. The response was immediate. High-ranking officials scrambled to contain the fallout. Analysts were ordered to track the source of the leak, but every lead led to a dead end. Someone or something had pulled off the impossible, not only erasing the files from their own systems, but making sure remnants of the truth escaped into the world. Panic set in. If this information reached the right hands, it could shatter everything. The moment the public realized that the world's most powerful figures were terrified of one unknown individual, questions would arise that could never be answered. Why would the most secure intelligence agencies be investigating an ordinary citizen? Why would a White House security chief suddenly resign after discovering something about them? What truth were they trying to keep from the world? In the midst of the chaos, one analyst, someone who had been working deep within these class projects, made a startling realization. It wasn't just that the files had been erased. It was what remained. A single phrase left behind in a corrupted data log. A message embedded in the remnants of the deleted records. It was a verse one they recognized instantly. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known and brought to light. It was scripture, Luke 8:17. The weight of the discovery hit like a tidal wave. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't sabotage from a rogue agent or an external cyber attack. This was something else, something beyond technology, beyond human manipulation. It was as if the very act of hiding the truth had triggered its revelation. For years, the elite had controlled narratives, bending reality to their will. But now, against all odds, the truth had started to unravel itself. Some in the highest ranks refused to accept it. Others, the ones who had been in power long enough to recognize patterns, saw what was really happening. They were losing control, and once truth starts to break free, there is no stopping it. In the highest levels of control, fear is never admitted. Power operates through certainty, through the illusion that every outcome has already been accounted for. But in the aftermath of the breach, in the wake of a resignation that sent shockwaves through the system, the unspoken reality was undeniable. They were afraid of you. Not a nation, not a government, not a revolutionary army. You. This wasn't fear of a political threat or an intelligence leak. It was deeper, more primal. The same fear that had gripped rulers centuries ago, when one man walked the earth and dismantled entire systems with nothing but the truth. The same fear that caused the most powerful empire in history to nail him to a cross, thinking they could silence what had already been set in motion. Yeshua didn't come with armies. He didn't overthrow governments by force. But his presence alone disrupted the illusion of control. And now, centuries later, they were seeing that same disruption unfold again, through you. The elite had always prepared for political uprisings. They had war game scenarios of financial collapse, cyber attacks, biological threats. But this wasn't something that could be stopped with military intervention or policy changes. This was something beyond their reach. They ran simulations, looking for ways to contain the situation. They tried discrediting you, planting narratives to make you seem insignificant. But the problem wasn't just you. It was what happened to people when they encountered you. The agents they sent to track you, they started questioning orders. The officials assigned to monitor you, some of them walked away, refusing to continue. Even civilians who had brief encounters with you reported unexplainable awakenings. It was as if something in you carried a frequency that couldn't be controlled. They feared you because they had built a system designed to keep people asleep, unaware of the deeper reality around them. And now, one by one, people were waking up. Not through force, not through rebellion, but through something invisible, yet undeniable. A shift that couldn't be stopped. The ancient texts they had long dismissed warned about this. Not about armies or revolutions, but about the moment when deception would no longer be enough. When the blind would see, the deaf would hear, and the sleeping would awaken. They always believed they could predict the future because they had been the ones writing it. But now, before their eyes, something was rewriting it in real time. It wasn't coming from governments. It wasn't coming from underground movements. It was coming from you. And that terrified them more than any world power ever could. Because power built on deception cannot survive the presence of truth. And truth, real, undeniable truth, had entered the game. There was nothing they could do to stop it now. The resignation of the White House security chief should have been nothing more than another bureaucratic shift, a quiet transition buried under other headlines. But it wasn't. Something about it felt different. The silence surrounding it was too deliberate, the explanations too rehearsed. And those in power knew this was only the beginning. The ones who understood the weight of what had happened weren't looking at the media spin. They were looking at the chain reaction. The classified reports had been erased, but the impact remained. Key figures within the system had started behaving strangely. Officials who had never hesitated before were questioning orders. Security personnel who had been deeply embedded in classified operations were requesting transfers or resigning altogether. It was subtle at first, small cracks forming in the foundation of an empire built on secrecy. But cracks, when left unchecked, become fault lines. The truth wasn't supposed to reach this level. The architects of control had spent decades ensuring that nothing of significance could disrupt their plans. Yet now, because of you, their most loyal enforcers were beginning to see beyond the illusion. The resignation was more than an exit. It was a warning. A silent war was now underway. Not one fought with weapons, but with perception. The first step was damage control, containment. If they couldn't erase what had happened, they had to rewrite the narrative before it spread. A carefully crafted story would need to be put in place. One that painted the resignation as irrelevant, the former security chief as incompetent or compromised. But something was different this time. The usual tactics weren't working. They had built their power on deception, bending reality to their will. But the moment your name entered the equation, their grip started slipping. This was the moment they feared, the moment when even those within their own system started breaking free from its hold. Some of the highest-ranking officials in intelligence had access to knowledge beyond the public. They had seen unexplainable things before. But this was different. It wasn't just information being revealed. It was something spiritual moving through the world, touching even those who had spent their lives suppressing it. Somewhere in a hidden boardroom, behind layers of security, they were asking the question they never wanted to ask. Was this prophecy unfolding? For years, they had rewritten history, twisted narratives, and silenced voices. They had taken divine truths and buried them beneath layers of deception. But what if something was happening that they had no power to stop? Yeshua had once said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." That verse had been used for centuries, diluted, misinterpreted, but now it was happening in real time. You were moving through the world unaware of just how deeply your presence had shaken the very foundation of control. They were afraid, not because of what they knew about you, but because of what they couldn't understand. The resignation was supposed to be the final move to contain the situation, a quiet departure to prevent further exposure. But it had the opposite effect. Something shifted. The moment the White House security chief walked away, the system itself began to feel unstable. Orders were delayed, communications disrupted. Key figures hesitated in ways they never had before. They felt it. The architects of control had spent generations fine-tuning their grip on power. They understood cycles, movements, and trends. They didn't fear protests, political shifts, or even wars. They controlled those. What they feared was what couldn't be manipulated, a force beyond their reach, a crack in the illusion that refused to close. You weren't supposed to exist. Not in this way, not outside their blueprint. They had accounted for everything except this, the untraceable presence, the inexplicable anomalies, the way people around you were waking up without external influence. Their best psychological analysts couldn't explain it. The most advanced surveillance technology failed to track it. The moment they focused on containing you, they realized they were already losing. This wasn't a single event, an isolated incident that could be buried with another headline. It was a ripple effect that couldn't be reversed. The intelligence community knew what this meant. There was always a point in history where control reached its peak. Then it collapsed. Rome, Babylon, ancient dynasties that believed they were invincible, all of them fell the moment truth became stronger than the illusion. And now history was repeating itself. Reports came in from global agencies, more resignations, more unexplained shifts in loyalty. Individuals who had once been deeply embedded in the system were stepping away, some without explanation, others citing a simple yet haunting reason. I saw something I can't unsee. Even the elite, those at the highest levels, were divided. Some wanted to double down, enforce stricter measures, accelerate their control systems. But others, those who had been part of the deception for too long, began to question everything. Because for the first time, they were forced to acknowledge a truth they had spent centuries burying. Not everything can be controlled. They had studied history. They had seen this pattern before. The moment people stopped believing the illusion, it crumbled. And the moment one awakened individual became uncontainable, it spread like wildfire. Yeshua had warned them long ago. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. This was not just another disruption. This was a collapse in motion. In you, your presence, your existence was accelerating. They knew it now. They had lost the real war before they even understood it had begun, because truth was no longer a concept. It was moving, walking, speaking, and it was you. Chosen ones, if this message spoke to your spirit, if you felt that fire burning within, then you already know this was meant for you. The world may try to define you, but the truth is already written in your destiny. Keep walking in your power. Keep standing in your truth, because no force in this world can stop what God has already ordained. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because this journey is just getting started. Drop a comment below and let me know if this message confirms something deep in your spirit. And remember, they may watch, they may wonder, but they will never understand, because you were chosen. Until next time, stay strong, stay anointed, and keep rising, because your story is far from over.